Keeping It Young podcast is sponsored in part by TWR360.org, giving the world powerful Christian content in more than 100 languages. Visit TWR360.org, the global internet platform of Trans World Radio. Welcome to Keeping It Young podcast, conversations about marriage, family, and ministry life. I'm Dave.
And I'm Bethany.
And we're the Youngs.
Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us again today. And last week we went a little long. I hope y'all were okay with that. And got carried away there, time-wise. But we are going to finish up today this little discussion we're doing about the book, The 5 Love Needs of Men and Women.
Right.
And last week I thought was a good discussion. Men do need encouragement.
Yes.
And they need
friendship.
Need friendship, and women do need spiritual intimacy.
Yes. And we had gone too long, and I didn't get to add to that. Ladies, if your husband is trying to walk with God, and so sometimes I hear ladies, they're talking to me and they're like, I want my husband to be a spiritual leader. And what they mean by that is, I want him to totally change his personality and not be who he is. I want him to be, this amazing pastor that I've seen on TV or something. They have a picture in their head of what a spiritual leader would be, and they are not being realistic. So ladies, I would caution you that if you heard our episode last week and you think, oh yes, that is my heart's cry, and my husband isn't measuring up to whatever your standard of spiritual leadership is, maybe take a step back and look. Is your husband trying to walk with God? Is he reading the Word of God? Is he trying to help you disciple the children in the way of the Word? Is he praying with you? Is he praying with your family? Maybe he doesn't do it perfectly. Maybe he doesn't do it every day. But is he at least trying? Then you do have a spiritual leader.
Sure. And give him every benefit of the doubt.
Yes, and encourage him in that way. Say things like, thank you for praying with our family. Thank you for praying with me. Thank you for having your devotions this morning. It's always an encouragement to me to see you sitting with the Word of God. And then he does know that you do appreciate it, instead of, well, I know you took us to church Sunday, but you didn't sing that one song. So you're not being the spiritual leader that I need. It could have just been that he needed to cough or something. He had a tickle in his throat and he couldn't sing the song. So instead of disparaging him, encourage him and be thankful for the steps that he does take.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good advice, ladies. Very, very good advice. And we haven't talked about all the needs necessarily, but just a reminder, the husband's listed 5: unconditional love, intimacy, friendship, encouragement, and spiritual connection.
Right.
The wives also listed 5, and they were
unconditional love, intimacy, spiritual intimacy, encouragement, and then friendship.
And so we've talked about just a couple of them there. We talked about the first one, and we actually talked about the first 3, and I think we're just going to cover one more here. Both list encouragement as one of the needs they feel like they want in their marriage.
Right.
I want encouragement. So husbands say, I want encouragement from my wife. Mm-hmm. Wives say, I want encouragement from my husband.
Yes.
And I found those very interesting that both listed those as a 4th need. Mm-hmm. And so they're worth our talking about.
Right.
And so regarding encouragement, men need it. And so here's what they had to say to wives. All right, so Not a great deal, but a few things I thought was worth pointing out, perhaps. There was something funny I read that he mentioned as well. He said the biggest reason men hate getting love handles is that they have to shop for new pants.
It's the shopping aspect again.
That made me laugh out loud, so I thought that was pretty funny. And here's a quote they said as well. Don't put walls between you and your spouse, put walls around your marriage. Mm. And sometimes the reason it's hard to encourage each other is we start putting up walls. Well, you're not like this, or he's not like that.
Right.
Or I can't believe, he did that, or he says that, or he doesn't do this.
Right.
When we begin to think in negative terms about, ladies, when you think in negative terms about your husband, mm-hmm. what you're going to find is that you're starting to put walls between you and your husband.
Right.
And we see that sometimes when we're with couples.
Yes.
And if you just think, if you'll start observing couples that you're around, you can see the couples that have put up walls.
Yes.
You can see the lady that is a little disdainful of her husband. Mm-hmm. And he knows it.
Right.
And so he either chooses to ignore her or to bark back at her in maybe sarcastic statements. Mm-hmm. And that is a terrible way to live a marriage.
It's really hard. And it is hard in a counseling session when you're sitting with a couple like that, because the Word of God can be very simple and practical when it comes to things like this: encouraging one another, edifying one another, being thankful for one another, being kind to one another. And that's what encouragement is all about. And you say to a couple like that, well, you just need to encourage one another or be thankful for one another or something. And it almost looks in their faces like there's no way I can do that. But it's because their walls of criticism and disdain have gotten so high that to even think about saying something nice
Yes.
to one another is just, it's unfathomable. That word is hard to say.
Say it again.
It's like narcissism. Unfathomable. There we go.
That's quite a mouthful.
It is.
Hey, just in light of that same thought there, it is interesting that a lot of couples can use like sarcasm
Yes.
sometimes we say things in a sarcastic way to make a point
Right.
rather than for humor. And everybody knows you're making a point. And typically when you approach issues with sarcasm, with negativity, with harshness, with unkindness, you will shut down the relationship.
Yes.
It puts a wall between you.
Right.
But these authors said that encouragement means you're putting a wall around your marriage. You're always looking to say, what am I doing to build? What am I doing to encourage? What am I doing to strengthen? What am I doing to bless and help? And that's how he lists. That's how he lists the idea of encouragement. And then they make an entire list. This is on page 155, and just some ideas. Okay, and tell me what you think about these. They said, here's a few ideas to get you started in the habit of encouragement to your husband. Write him a note telling him how proud you are of him. Find out where his heart is with the Lord, what he is learning. Tell him in front of the kids that you're thankful for the way he provides for your family's needs.
Right.
Call his parents and brag on him, if possible, when he can overhear you.
Yes.
Affirm him for the way he loves you. Any further thoughts would come off the top of your head about either comment on those, or you think, well, you could also do this? What would you add to that?
Well,
to encourage a husband.
It's really easy to send and write words of encouragement these days because we have phones. We can text. So sending an encouraging text to your husband is super easy. If you can't find a card that you want to write, or if you can't find a piece of paper to write it down on, then you can send him a text really quickly and just say, hey, I appreciate you so much. Thankfulness goes such a long way. I know that the word that the Bible uses from Ephesians 5:33 is the wife see that she reverence her husband. And we've talked about that before. It is to hold him in awe. Like, I'm just in awe of you. I think you're amazing. And that would come out in thankfulness. Wow, you did this for me. Thank you so much for that. And that, I think, would go a long way in encouraging. You would know this more. You know what your heart feels like when words come out of my mouth. I think sometimes we just get too busy. I don't think all couples have those walls of criticism. It's just they're just so busy. And so they get to a place where they've been going and going and going, and then they look at each other and are like, oh, hi, how are you?
Right.
Yeah, I remember you. And it's hard to then, because you've been so busy and you haven't been spending time together or doing things for each other, to think of something to encourage each other about.
That's a good point. And I would add to it, I'm sitting here thinking about, first of all, the 5 love languages. And that's another book that maybe we ought to talk through sometime. But the 5 love languages, ladies, if your husband his need may be, what encourages him is receiving gifts, or it may be what encourages him is quality time, or what encourages him is affirmation.
Right.
You ought to really study your husband. What is it that he enjoys that really encourages him? And then you ought to try that.
Right.
If he, if getting gifts isn't, on your way somewhere, buy him his favorite candy bar or his favorite drink.
Right.
And just being aware of, if it's words of affirmation, then take the time to speak words of affirmation. If it's quality time, then set aside time to spend just with him.
Right.
So you have to kind of know your husband and what his needs are, what makes him feel encouraged. So I think the 5 love languages might be a good place that ladies.
Yes.
I know often we tend to think of husbands talk a lot to me about the 5 love languages. You know, this is what my wife, you know, I love that book because it helped me to understand this about my wife.
Right.
And all men will almost always say she's bilingual or trilingual. She speaks multiple languages. And there's truth to that because life is up and down, and especially for a lady. But that men try to understand that is a good thing. Ladies, you could do the same thing for your husband.
Yes.
But the other side of that, one other thing I would say before we leave this one is I think sometimes encouragement is just fun.
True.
I get a kick out of it. In our conferences with couples, oftentimes Bethany will, or has in times past recently told about that she watches me if I work in the yard. and she talks about thinking, oh my goodness, that's my good looking husband out there working in the yard. It is amazing how many people follow that up and comment on it.
True.
And how many times has a pastor gotten up, even the last time you said it, and he got up and he said, I'm going to start working in the yard more often.
I'm going to go chop down some
trees. I'm going to chop down some trees and buy me an axe. And it just is amazing how that rings in the heart of guys, because guys always comment on that. And it just, encouragement doesn't have to be this, you know, I don't know, textbook thing about, okay, today he needs to be encouraged, so I shall speak words of affirmation.
Right.
Sometimes it's just that I love you and I'm building you, I'm encouraging you, and I'm noticing you, and I'm aware of you.
Well, I would say it's more of a lifestyle. So that
That's
if you have gotten into the lifestyle of sarcasm and being prickly and being critical, then your husband will be discouraged. But if you are in the habit of affirming him, of loving him, of being thankful, of building, I was just reading this morning in Ephesians chapter 4, the verse that we have quoted many, many times. Is it verse 29? Let no corrupt communication.
20, yes, I think it is.
Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace. Well, the word edifying, of course, we all know it means the word build, but Strong's also put in there this little, I don't know, a definition that made it come more alive to me this morning. It said to make habitable, like it's a habitable house. It's a building that you have built in such a way that it's comfortable.
In the sense of inhabit.
Yes.
Where you can live there.
I can live there. And so that your words are a place where your husband, he can just live there. He can rest there instead of coming home to a house that's just the words are cluttering, or the words are prickly, or the words are uncomfortable. He comes home to a house where the words are building. He can inhabit it. He can just live there.
That's really good. Really, really good. One other thing the author said was you can pray for him. And that's a good point as well.
It is.
So ladies, pray for your husband. One of the ways you can encourage him is to pray for him.
Yes.
And, pray about what, his needs are, and pray God will bless him and God will use him and God will, open doors for him. Just make that a daily part of your relationship to your husband, that you pray for him.
Yes.
And that's part of being an encouragement. Let's take a break and talk a little bit more about the Church Crew. We so appreciate our sponsorship with the Church Crew, and I hope you'll certainly check them out.
That would be thechurchcrew.com. They are an affiliate of the Keeping It Young podcast, and we want to tell you about them. I have good friends in my church who are in charge of the nursery schedule. And I know that it can be frustrating to them, not only getting volunteers, but making sure that those volunteers are spread out fairly throughout the nursery schedule so that not one person is working all the time. And I know that my friends who are in charge of it, often they have to step in and be that last minute volunteer because they can't find anybody. And sometimes people aren't answering texts or whatever that case may be, that they can't find someone to step in at the last minute. But the churchcrew.com takes care a lot of that headache.
Yes. And it's not just for nursery workers. The churchcrew.com is for any volunteers that you have in your church.
Yes.
And it just takes the scheduling part of that, all the potential conflicts, the vacations. It makes sure that every volunteer is spaced out as much as possible, and it works for any size church, and it's very affordable. So anyone who's in charge of scheduling would find this program worth evaluating. It doesn't cost very much at all. It's designed for any size church. You'd find it easy to use.
Well,
That's thechurchcrew.com.
I was even looking on here where it says that volunteers can log on and find their own substitute. So wouldn't that be awesome if you're in charge of a ministry, whether it's a hospitality ministry, a nursery ministry, the ushering ministry, whatever that may be, you can set this all up and your volunteers, if they're not going to be there, they can log on, they can get their own substitute.
It will handle the approval and update everybody automatically.
Yes.
If you haven't checked it out yet, go to thechurchcrew.com and check out their website. Try it out for free. I think you'll like it. And while you're there, let them know how grateful you are that they sponsor Keeping It Young. And now let's get back to the program today.
Okay.
So one final thing here to talk about. Men are not the only ones who listed encouragement. Women did too.
Yes.
So let's just talk for a few moments here to close out today. How can a husband encourage his wife and meet this need in her life? The authors on page 159 in discussing this listed 5 differences in the husband's need and the wife's need.
Is this needs for encouragement?
Right. This is about
Okay.
encouragement. A husband may need a card once or twice a year to tell them that they're loved. So in other words, that's not a huge important to them. Maybe once a year, okay, fine. A wife would need daily doses of I love you. Cards and flowers work well too.
Yes.
A husband might need an evening out every so often. A wife would need one evening every week with just the two of you.
Ultimately, and yes, in a perfect world, that would be awesome.
Husbands need a buddy for golfing or sailing or boating or bowling or hunting. They just need a buddy.
Yes.
Wives need a female friend in whom she can confide her heart.
Yes.
Men want to do something with a buddy. Women want to confide in a buddy.
Yes.
Men need a new challenge every 5 years or so to keep life interesting. Women need frequent timeouts from her routine in order to recharge.
Yes, because our life is challenging enough.
Men need a slap on the back from the guys, and women need supportive hugs from her female friends. Just thinking through what they're showing there is that men and women are different, so encouragement takes different forms for each of them.
Yes.
So the way your husband needs to be encouraged is one way. Husbands, the way your wife needs to be encouraged is going to be totally different.
Yes. And the list that they listed for the men, they gave like 5 ideas, I think it was, for the men. Here's 5 ways that you can encourage your husband. They gave 13 ways that you
thought that
could
was hilarious.
encourage your wife.
Guys, here's 5 ways you can encourage your wife. Ladies, here's 13 ways.
Right.
Or actually,
Vice
I had that
versa.
opposite. Yes.
Yes.
And so to husbands, here's what he says, guys. I'll just throw them out at you. He says you can tell her how valuable and important she is as a wife. You can smile at her when you walk in the door. You can listen when she expresses her frustrations about her own day, and remember that her pressures and stresses are just as real as yours. Be patient when she's tired and grouchy. We don't ever have to deal with that one. That's an easy one. Give her some space when she needs it. Let her talk your ear off when she needs to do so. Just let her do it. Lift her spirits by reminding her of all the things she does right. Leave her thank you notes or love notes on the bathroom mirror or other places like that. Take home a bouquet of flowers for no reason. Tell her how valuable and important she is as a mother. Let her know that you understand that being at home with young kids can be very hard and lonely. Steady her emotions by recognizing that babies and preschoolers require a lot of energy.
Yes.
And boy, that's the truth, isn't it?
Yes.
They do. And here's 2 others. He says, step in and help with those endless bouts of things like chicken pox and flu and earaches and teething and so forth. And give your wife extra help with errands or laundry or grocery shopping, especially if she is housebound with either, homeschool kids or sick kids and so forth.
Right.
So he just lists 13 different ways there that a husband can, that to me, they seem very practical.
Yes.
What do you say about all those?
I would say that too. And, one of the love languages that Dr. Chapman talks about is acts of service. And especially during those early mommy years, when your husband comes in and says, here, let me help you with, and you just fill in the blank, whether it be laundry or dishes or giving the children baths or bedtime routines or whatever that is, it does take maybe just one thing off of that busy mommy's plate, but just taking that one thing is such a load off. And you're just like, oh, that is awesome. That's so encouraging. It may just be 10 minutes that she can just sit down and have a cup of tea, or it may be 10 minutes that she can run and get other things done so that later that evening, you two can sit together and she's not still working on her to-do list.
Yes. It did seem like a lot of what he talked about there, a lady's need for encouragement, has to do with the busyness of raising children.
Yes.
Did you think that too?
Yes, the early mommy years, but also as you age and as you get into maybe empty nest or an emptier nest. We're not empty nesters yet, but we still have a few at home.
We're old enough to be, but we still have kids at home.
We do. And there are times, there are days where it's just, there's too much on my plate. And it is an encouragement to me when David will come in and say, well, here, let me take this, or let's just take that off your list today. Let's not even worry about that. We don't need to do that.
Yep. Now, let's say that a family, let's say the couplers are listening and they are empty nesters. This is not about the pressure of kids or, chicken pox or flus or anything like that.
Right.
This is an older couple. How do you think a husband can encourage his wife in those years?
Well, I would say don't take her for granted. She's still doing a whole lot to keep that house going. And sometimes what goes on to keep the household running is so behind the scenes that people do take it for granted. So I would say don't take her for granted. Understand she may only be doing laundry for 2 people, but she's still doing laundry. She may only be cooking for 2 people or grocery shopping for 2 people, but she's still doing those things. So don't take it for granted. Make sure that you say thank you. Make sure that you see it. Sometimes wives say to me, I just don't feel seen. You're one of the most prominent people in the home, because what happens when mom gets sick? She gets sick, she goes to bed, everything falls apart, it seems to, in the house, and everybody's like, where's mom? But when mom is doing everything she's supposed to do, then people just take it for granted. So make sure that you see her, you understand where she is, just kind of keep a finger on the pulse of how she's doing emotionally. These could be very emotional years when you're empty nesters and maybe your children live far from you. I know that's one of the things we've talked about recently, where we have children that live far from us. We have a grandbaby who lives far from us, and just the emotions of, oh, I wish I could just pick up and go see them, and our schedule and their schedule doesn't always coincide, and we're not able to do that. So just being aware that she may be feeling some emotions over that and encouraging her in that way. And just maybe all you can say is, I understand and I'm here for you, but being there for her in those ways. And also not taking your relationship for granted. Sometimes it's just the 2 of you and you're like, well, we're together all the time. I don't need to tell her that I love her. I don't need to bring her flowers, or I don't need to take her on a date. We're together all the time. But she still needs those special things, those dates, those times where you are just the 2 of you, and it's not, oh, we're going to just take a walk. No, we're going to get dressed up. We're going to go out, and I'm going to treat you like a lady, and I'm going to remind you that I love you.
Yeah. And you know what I think is that there's a couple of things. There's 2 things I would say. The first one is speaking is important, speaking. And the second thing is spending time. So we speak. One of the things that's showing up here is that, guys, you have to speak to each other, and you have to open your mouth and say it. When you observe her and you notice her, you just have to say it. It has to be something that you're sharing, you're speaking, you're telling her, you know what, I noticed this, I love you, I see this, I understand this, I'm aware of this. And then you have to spend time with her. It's just that important. It's no other way around it.
Yes.
And so the way you encourage is with your wife is that you notice her and you tell her and you do things for her and you help her. And the understanding, you have to also, according to this, and we're about out of time here, is you have to understand how she is wired. She needs to process an issue by talking through it out loud. That's important. Talking through it out loud.
Yes. And it is, we process things, not every lady, this is generally speaking, but we process things by talking it through. Men process things usually mentally. They want to keep it in. They just want to think it through. And sometimes as a wife, all I need to do is just say, maybe 10 minutes worth of something to David and say, well, this happened and then this happened and this, and then I wasn't sure about this and I'm not sure about that. And as I'm talking, it's actually kind of coming together in my heart. Whereas, for David, he's thinking, wow, this is a mess. I don't know what to do about this. But that can be encouraging to her just to listen as she unwinds from her day, as she thinks through something.
Yeah, and this is, as we're winding things down here, the husband has to encourage his wife. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
And the ways to encourage, they did list 3 different types of women, and Bethany wasn't totally sure she agreed with that. There's an independent woman who, I can do it myself. I don't need anybody.
Right.
There's an insecure woman who, is a very self-reflective, very self-concerned, and always deflects praise and becomes very difficult to,
right.
To encourage because she won't let you.
Right.
But most ladies are somewhere in between that. He calls it the balanced lady.
Right.
And so husbands, what you've got to learn to do is you've got to learn to speak. You've got to learn to notice and say so. Mm-hmm. And you've got to learn to give it the time.
Yes.
And that is a way to encourage, to strengthen, to build, to be a help and blessing to your wife.
Well, and I think, again, usually with couples, it's not so much that they're struggling, it's just that they are busy.
Right.
And so they forget that doing things for each other that encourages one another, speaking those love languages that each other has, it's the thing that makes marriage enjoyable. It's the thing that keeps you glued together. You need that. You need that encouragement. If you don't have that and you're just flying through life, busy, 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 then you will start to have those struggles. Your wife will feel insecure. Maybe I'm not doing this right. Maybe he's not loving me the way he used to. And the husband may find himself feeling a little distant from his wife and thinking, okay, what's going on here? So you need those times of encouragement. I would say probably aim for once or twice a day to try to be encouraging one to another.
I guess it's a reminder too. One of the things we learn as we read these books and as you and I prepare these podcasts and things is that relationships never happen by accident. Mm-hmm. Relationships are built.
Right.
And then they're sustained. Mm-hmm. And we add to them and we grow through them and we add more to them. And
right.
we recognize here's an area I need to improve. We recognize here's an area, and life always changes and there's new seasons and new challenges and new blessings and new favors. And sometimes there's a move or there's a job situation. There's all kinds of things in life, but relationships are built. So this encouragement is important on both sides,
yes.
But it's just a matter of an awareness of each other, an awareness of each other's needs, and doing all that we can to meet that particular need.
True.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I thought these were worth mentioning. I already gave one. It's just understanding your wife. She needs to process an issue by talking through it out loud, so let her. The author said, don't argue with her emotions, just like you wouldn't touch a live wire. Just don't argue with her emotions. What she feels is what she feels, and that's valid. Mm-hmm. Sometimes she does just have to drain the pain. He calls that tears. That's his phrase for tears.
Yes.
Sometimes that's just the need she has, so let her. And he also said that silence can sound like rejection, which is a reminder of what I just said. She has to hear your words.
Yes.
Because those are important. And guys, if you need a few ideas on getting started, he lists on page 172, they list just these. Open up to your wife, talk. Try to make a point of letting her see what's happening in your heart. Always try to one-up her. When she tells you that she loves you, make sure you tell her 2 times that you love her. Reflect her love language. We've already mentioned that one. Have a love affair with her. Get to know her all over again. Treat her as if you've only known her for a few days. And just work on that marriage. Set aside a night for the 2 of you every week. Say you love her with flowers. Vacuum her car. Clean her windows. Accept her sensitivity. What appears at times to be oversensitivity to you is the very dimension of womanhood that makes her alert and sensitive to your needs. So resist the urge of trying to change her. I thought that was a good way to kind of end that. Mm-hmm. And so any other thoughts? We've come to the end of this book. Well, it's not the end of it. There's more to it. We just wanted to highlight those things. All in all, we would say it's a good book. To be honest, I liked it better than Bethany did. We've already said that.
Right.
And I think probably because it's more practical to the husbands maybe, and a little more confrontational. When they speak to the husbands, to me, I get more practical out of it.
Okay.
But on the other side, it can be a little more confrontational, Bethany thought. And yet I'd recommend it, The 5 Love Needs of Men and Women by Dr. Gary and Barbara Rosberg. We would recommend it, be worth your reading. We can always be learning and growing and advancing in our marriage relationship.
Absolutely. And we love to highlight books. We love to be able to give you resource information so that you can, pick and choose, go through different podcast episodes where you're like, oh, this one is on parenting. I really could use this one, or this one's on marriage. I could really use this one. And remembering that books are fallible. Not everything in them is something that you can take and apply to your marriage, but you can certainly learn from them. And that's why we always want to make them available.
Absolutely. So thank you for listening. And of course, if you're enjoying the podcast, we hope you'll tell others about it. We hope you'll go to either Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're able to leave a rating, we hope you'll do that.
Absolutely.
And of course, we hope you'll practice what you're learning.
Yes.
And while we're at it, we haven't really asked for these in a long time, but if there's questions that you would love to hear us answer, shoot us a text, shoot us an email, find us on social media, shoot us a message. We are compiling those because in coming weeks we'll be doing several sessions of questions and answers. And we'd love to hear from you about that. So reach out to us, and if we can do anything for you, be a blessing, help, and encouragement to you, we would love to hear from you about that as well.
Absolutely. And you could go to our website and find our schedule. And if we're somewhere near you, we would love to see you.
Absolutely. Well, in the meantime, we hope this week ahead that you will serve the Lord with gladness.
The Keeping It Young podcast is a Bax 5 Media production.